So overall, just to give you the overall process of the budget, it begins in September with the town and the Board of Education. The boards help build their budgets. The budgets then are brought to, in January, Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, the meeting for town staff, combined Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, Board of Ed, meeting for the educational budget. So that's pretty much just the nuts and bolts of what the process is. Then in terms, up until now, what has happened? So the education budget has been approved by the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen. The town budget has been approved by the Board of Selectmen, and tonight the Board of Finance receives both recommended budgets from the boards. Tonight begins the Board of Finance budget review. Public input is incredibly important. We have several meetings that will be open to the public that you can come and make comments on, and then we'll have another public hearing. I think it's in April. I think I have a slide with the date. But it doesn't stop here. Again, we're asking for public input. There's a lot on the table. There's a lot in this budget, a lot of things that have to be done, and we want to have open communication and transparency with the public on what we're doing, what we're thinking, and what your feelings are about the budget. Board of Finance budget workshops. Board of Finance second public hearing is April 29th. Someone had asked me that. Board of Finance recommended budget 20 for the 2021 budget referendum for May 19th, 2020, and Board of Finance sets the mill rate. Okay? Tonight's procedure, as I said, we'll have the Board of Education present first, then the town will be presenting their budget, and then you'll have time for questions and comments. Any questions? Okay, so I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Good evening. So the Board of Education budget actually begins way back with the work of the administrative team, I'd say later part of August, early September. Then in early fall, we work on a process that we've done now for about 8 or 9 straight years called budget assumptions. And those budget assumptions are some of the key factors that we make promises to the Board of Ed based on Board of Ed feedback and the administrative team's feedback will be a part of that budget recommendation. So there's no surprise, it's a key part of the budget process. Once those assumptions are either formally adopted or at least reviewed by the Board of Education, then they're built in, and the very first review of the Board of Education's budget takes place from the administrative team in early December. We do some workshops, and we do our best to make some heavy decisions and hard decisions up front so that the Board of Ed is getting a budget that is reasonable and doesn't just throw every request up against the wall. We do our best to make some decisions up front. So the Board of Education has received a fully vetted budget. That happens around Christmas break, holiday break, and then the Board of Education, typically the right before, right after, will hold a series of workshops to review the administration's recommended budget, and then make some decisions before formally adopting. The Board of Education adopted the budget from the recommendation from my administrative team in early January. Went to the Board of Selectmen, which I believe was approved a week or so ago as well. So I'll go into what that Board of Education adopted budget looks like, and any other questions I'll be available to answer as well. So first and foremost, all of our work is guided by our district vision statement, which has been in place since 2012, 2013. This drives all the curriculum work. I won't read it to you. It's on our website. There's also links to our curriculum documents that support this vision statement. Very vibrant statement all the way down to the classroom level. The overall picture on one sheet here, just to simplify things, you could break down the Board of Education's budget. Will that work here? The light work? I don't think so. Okay.
Hold in the red spot.
I'm colorblind, so... Oh, that is red. Okay, good. I'd like you to just keep your attention on these categories right here to start off with. So general education, special education, facilities, plan and cycle maintenance, and health insurance. And I'll talk about each of these categories here. So general education is all the services that we provide to our classrooms and materials, supplies, teachers, staffing, and so forth. As you can see here, from 1920, adjusted, approved, the recommended budget. This is the change from year to year, but this is the increase of what comprises the overall 1.09. Almost 0.69% is related to general education. Special education, which is remarkable, typically the change we see year over year in special education, and the standard across the state, is really anywhere between 6% to 10%, sometimes higher. I have to attribute this right here to the work of our special ed director, Dr. Liz Battaglia, and the programs we've been putting in place to provide services in our schools and to not have to service kids outside of the Madison Public Schools, which is very costly, and really help keep these numbers in a really good place. So this is really, for us, just an incredible number when you look at the historical numbers, not only for Madison, but across the state here. So it's quite an achievement. In facilities, there were some increases for repairs. If you haven't heard, we have some old schools that are in need of some repairs. That increase is attributed to there, and Bill McMinn's here. He can talk a little about it if we need to tonight. Plan and cycle maintenance, it's a flat number. It's been a flat number at $359.5 for a few years now. That's an account that's held by the town, and Bill McMinn, Director of Facilities, will use that for projects and planned projects, carpeting, painting, and other larger projects, non-capital bonded projects, but projects that happen over time. And by the town holding it, the Board of Ed cannot hold funds year over year, the town can. So that goes into a town fund, but it comes out of the Board of Education budget, and that's a flat number that we hold from year over year the past 2 years. It's another number that's really, at some point, we're going to have a market adjustment, I believe, but the last couple of years, our healthcare numbers have remained relatively flat, which, it's not uncommon to see healthcare numbers at an 8% to 10% or more increase. We did have 1 year, about maybe 4 years ago, where we had a significant increase in healthcare. And that was it was just shy of, I think, a 20% increase. It's based on claims. We've had a very healthy staff. We have a very vibrant wellness program, and I believe that's attributing to keeping these numbers flat. But at some point, there'll be an adjustment. But for this year, it's relatively flat as well. So the operational budget for the Board of Education from 2019 to 2020 is a 1.29%. We do have a reduction in the debt, the school bond, which is the high school bond that we've been paying and will pay for a few more years. So that brings the overall number of the school budget to 1.09%. What's that increase look like? You can see a simple pie chart here. The majority of that is benefits and personnel. There's some reductions in debt service and some other accounts across the system. Minor increase in it's basically flat in healthcare and a very small increase in facilities. And again, this account, health insurance and special education, it could go the opposite direction, and it could be a 10 or more % increase in any given year based on the needs of the kids. And for health insurance, based on their staff. So enrollment's been declining for some time now. I came on board in 2012. The enrollment decline had begun already, and it was in the elementary level at that point. And we have shed one certified teacher for about every 21 students that we have declined in enrollment over that time period, about 10 years now. So if you look at that, over the course of almost 10 years, we've shed just over 53 full-time equivalency teaching positions. If you want to think of it in more school-based ways, we've shed the equivalent of 2 elementary schools of staffing. Now, not necessarily the facilities, we closed 1 facility, but we have shed at least 2 average-sized schools, 25, 26 or so teachers. So over that time period, we've shed that, in addition to support staffing, and here's the overall number. But this rate, this 1 student per 20 or 21, one staffing position per 20 or 21 students, has stayed true over about a 9-10-year period. And this is the history. This was the year that we had a pretty large health insurance increase. If you go back even further, over about a 9-year period, that number's been consistent. We've averaged about a 1.74 budget increase from the Board of Education since 2012. So this is just a 5-year, and it's been pretty consistent. Last year was a bit of an anomaly. We went backwards because that was the year that we closed Island Avenue School last year. Obviously that was the year that was a little slightly below zero. And this year we're at 1.09 is being recommended to the Board of Finance. So for the slides, where's Peggy? Peggy, you want to go and you want to have some questions first? How do you want to do this? Jean, it's your meeting?
Why don't you do both presentations
And then we'll do questions. Okay. Yep. Oh, you did?
Sorry.
All right.
That work? Yep. Okay, great. All right, so first of all, thank you, Tom, for your budget, which is very conservative and responsible, and I appreciate that. I just want to introduce, first of all, myself. I'm First Selectman Peggy Lyons, and I apologize I'm a little off kilter. I just spent an hour talking about beach passes, so now I'm moving on to the budget. So I don't know which is worse, to be honest. so moving from our public information on beaches to now the budget hearing. Also wanted to introduce our other members of the Board of Selectmen. Al Goldberg is here tonight, Scott Murphy, and Bruce Wilson. And Erin Duquesne could not be here. She had a family commitment. But this is the team that kind of worked through to come up with this budget. And I also wanted to say thanks to our staff, Stacy and Kristen and the whole finance department, as well as the staff in town government, because really this is something that they've been working on for a long time and put a lot of hard work into it. And I think we're incredibly grateful to have such a knowledgeable staff to work with. So what were our objectives this year? Doing a budget is always a balancing act. It's kind of weighing taxes, which is where basically revenue to the town, and providing a high level of quality services to support quality of life for Madison residents. And so I think we're always trying to be mindful of that as we look through the town budget. And some of the goals that we laid out was to develop a responsible budget that reflects community priorities, evaluate our existing programs, and somebody new into the office, I spent a lot of time trying to understand what we offer, and I think we're going to continue to do that, what services we offer the community, how do we make them better, and where are we not getting value for money perhaps out of those services. We also want to continue to fund our capital, and that includes all our fixed assets in town government. And it's important that we maintain, sustain, and improve the assets that help us provide those services. We also want to start saving today for future needs that we know are coming down the pipe. And that was an important part of our discussion and deliberation for this budget. We also want to minimize the mill rate impact on taxpayers. And we're always being careful to think about that, because none of us like surprises. No one likes to pay taxes, and so we obviously want to be mindful and careful of the citizens and make sure that they're have no surprises. And then we're trying to introduce new ideas to improve operational efficiencies. And I've been trying to really get my arms around how we function, how we're structured, and how can we do things better. We also had a number of challenges, and I laid those out in the State of the Town address in our budget this year. Things that were kind of controllable versus uncontrollables. And so we had to do a few things that we had to absorb in our budget that year that we've taken some hits on. So I'll walk through that a little bit more as we go forward. This is a graphic version of the process. It's a little busy, and Jean spoke at a high level. This is just taking a deeper dive to understand that this is a lengthy process that will start in the fall. There's numerous meetings. A lot of these are public meetings. There's an opportunity for everybody here to come and listen to as the board members talk and ask questions and dig into things. And there's also a process before it even gets to the board. The first selectman working with the department heads and staff to come up with the budget. We hold public workshops, and the Board of Finance and Board of Selection teamed up this year to meet with staff and ask even more questions. So I think some staff members have been invited back probably 3 times to talk about their department budgets. And then finally, last week, we didn't talk, there's also the CIP process, which is a public process, that's our capital funding process. And last week, the Board of Selectmen then pulled it all together, made a bunch of decisions, and voted on a budget that you're looking at today, which is our recommended budget for next year. Now we're at this public hearing, and then the next slide, Jean covered all of this. Here are the important dates about the next steps and things for the public. We'll have many opportunities to weigh in on this. And ultimately, it's your choice. It's your budget, and you'll be voting on this on May 20th, or May 19th, excuse me. The mill rate will be set, and then you'll get those wonderful tax bills in the mail. So what is the budget for this year? Obviously, no one likes to see numbers as big as these are. I was kind of surprised as they rolled up. Oh, uh-oh, it's officially broken. Hold on a second. Perfect timing, as I'm showing the budget. Okay, I'll have to squeeze it. There we go. So anyway, so this year we're looking at a total operational budget of $23.5 million. It is, growing. The total town budget with capital and debt service is growing at $2 million. And generally, though, the mill rate impact, as we can see, which I think is the most important thing, is about a 2.2% tax increase. And I'll walk through a lot of this, but some of this is structurally driven, and some of this is due to just one-offs that we had to recognize this year in the budget to right-size some things. And so I'm going to walk through the details on the next slide. Just how does this compare from previous years? Last year the town operating budget was up about 7%. This year we're up about 6.7%. The total town budget is last year 7.1. Now we're saying 7.8. Overall, 2.2% growth last year, 3.2% this year. And mill rate growth is around 2.2%. The average over the last 5 years is 2.4%. And actually the 10-year average compounded annual growth rate of the mill rate is actually 4.7%. So despite a lot of the big numbers that we're seeing, the tax impact is not going to be that significant. It's going to be in line with what we've seen for years and even below average. So what's driving the $2 million increase? 68% of our budget is driven by non-discretionary items, if you stand back. These are things like salaries and benefits, wages, insurance, utilities. And of the increase, 67% is relating to two categories. One is the wages, salaries, and benefits, and the other is we have a brand new library rolling online. The last 2 years, the library budget was actually reduced because we had smaller space, smaller footprint, smaller staff, but our new library is opening in July, which we're all excited to see, and it's something that the community has voted to support, but with a newer building that's twice as big as the previous library, as well as more staff to support the larger building. We have to recognize that this year and move forward with a larger budget. The other thing is the ambulance services is contributing to the increase. The ambulance, I think, has been an ongoing discussion about how do we recognize how much of their budget should the town pay for. They've had a number of challenges on the revenue side, and so the town every year has continued to help contribute more and more to their budget. So for example, the library, we cover about 85% of their operating budget. The ambulance, historically, we've only covered about 30%. And the last couple of years, we've had to keep contributing more to their budget to make them sustainable. We're now close to 50% of that budget. So this year is kind of right-sizing our contribution to the ambulance services. Another reason for the increase is capital funding, more money going into capital project, and debt service, because the library now, we're fully absorbing the debt from the library bond issuance last year of $10 million. And then, so only about 4% of this $2 million increase is really discretionary, I would say. Requests from town staff, maybe some extra hours here and there, things that, or additional staffing positions. And we did say no to a lot. The Board of Selectmen actually did not approve over probably about $400,000 in requests. So this isn't people coming forward and they get what they ask. This is a very rigorous process, very thoughtful process. And so we try to be very mindful, as I said, to keep that balance always. Continuing services, investing in our buildings, but also keeping taxes as low as we can. So jump in a little bit more to the details. Here's kind of a walkthrough of last year's operational town budget, which is at the top, at $22 million. Wages and salaries, that's just something that rolls forward. In terms of union contracts, step increases, and COLA adjustments. So, and luckily, benefits, we don't get hit as bad because the town is self-funded, so we don't have as big of a benefit cost every year as a lot of other communities who don't self-fund on the healthcare side. The new Scranton Library, $324,000 of additional costs. And I think we're all going to really love the library and support it, but this is the year where we're having to kind of realign the budget to absorb the new library. The other big hit, which was kind of a stunner for me, was the pension fund requirement. It turns out that municipal employees live longer, and so we have to adjust how we make our contributions to the pension fund. And so we've got to have to readjust how we do that this year. This is a one-off adjustment that we're making so that we're adequately funding the pension in the long term. This is kind of the responsible thing to do to make sure we're able to meet our needs for our retired employees. I spoke earlier about ambulances. We're trying to right-size and absorb more of their budget so they can continue to offer the quality of service to the community that they can. Staff positions, the net amount is $61,000. I have another slide just to dig in more because I know a lot of people like to question about, are we adding employees and why? We also implemented a new software system this year, Munis, and that went from $17,000 a year annual maintenance to $100,000 a year annual maintenance. And then we split that cost with the Board of Education. So this reflects the town's share of that. It's a huge increase. Hopefully it'll be a phenomenal system that we'll be able to use for many years to come, but that was a big whack to the budget this year to absorb that. Utilities, obviously there's always going to be some increases in utilities, and then just other contracts and insurance. So that's kind of the walkthrough of why the operational budget has gone up. And then on the previous slide, you can see that there's also capital and debt service. That's driving the budget increase this year. So let's talk a little bit about staffing. This is the breakdown of the staffing changes. There's one new full-time position in this budget, and that's something that I've been advocating for as a purchasing agent. This is kind of a standard thing. In the corporate world, in the private sector, it's almost every company has a purchasing agent that I've ever dealt with. In the private sector, or in the municipal world, it's also a very common thing. And basically what this person does is implements it as a best practice. It creates better transparency when we go out for bid for contracts and when we buy goods and services for town government. More competition hopefully will result in cost savings. It's also something that 70% of the towns in our kind of economic reference group have, including some of our neighbors. And I think this is one of the things I promised when I was running, was to try to implement best practices and operational excellence into our town government, and this is a position I think that will offer that. Beach and rec staffing is another area that we've had to right-size kind of our model. We're now committing to lifeguards, we're committing to gate guards, and if you were here at 6 o'clock, there's a whole detailed dive on what the staffing model is going to look like for beach and rec this summer. But obviously there's a cost associated with that, and what we tried to do is balance out the increased staffing by redirecting some of the security services firms that we had used in the past, shrinking the number of hours that security was there, and to absorb the cost of the staffing at the beaches. Youth and Family Services, this parent support counselor was a position actually that was in last year's budget as a part-time position. The town had committed that it thought there was a big need out there in the community, and it wanted to have somebody providing the service. Unfortunately, just because of the nature of the job and the type of people that are attracted to this type of position, part-time wasn't going to cut it. And there was a strong message that we really needed to make it a full-time position in order to effectively hire and have somebody fill that position. And then finally, what I did is I went through the budget and I said, well, what are all these jobs here that were never actually filled? And we went through each one and decided, you know, if these were jobs that were approved last year as new positions, but they were actually never hired. No one was ever hired to fill those positions. And so we decided if it had been 12 months and no one had been hired and things are still getting done, do we really need them? And so we did make an adjustment and eliminated a couple of those positions. So the net impact on staffing is $61,000 as a result of that. The other part of the budget is capital. And this is basically our CIP list for this year, and it shows you last year's and this year's. And really, what is most of this? Well, what was interesting to me was just vehicles makes up almost $1 million of this list. Fire trucks, pickup trucks, but it's a sizable number. The other thing is public safety combined with vehicles and other equipment is, you know, almost a third of that as well. So this is important investment in core services to the community. And so I think it's something that, as a town, has been a great program since this was launched a couple of years ago. It's a better way to track, and it's a better way to plan for our capital investment needs. And then the other thing is just making sure that we can start saving, because we're going to have a lot more coming down the pike. And we know that we have some big projects looming in the future. There's 2 bonding referendums that the town is going to have to weigh in on in the fall. And so I think this budget reflects the fact that we understand there's a lot more going in the future. So we actually decided as a board to kick in another $400,000 into the capital budget to start preparing and planning for this future, for our future capital needs. The one thing I will say that out of the CIP discussion and the budget discussions, there was a lot of questions about needs assessment. Do we really need that truck? Do we really need that piece of equipment? Do we need that building? Do we need to improve that building or make it bigger? And I think one of the things we've started to do is how do we get the right kind of data and information so that future boards can make better decisions about that. It's hard when you have an expert in their field come in and say, we need that. And the natural reaction is, do they really need that? You know, so there's a lot of pushback. And I think we decided that one of the things we're going to be doing is looking at, particularly in public safety, what do we need in public safety to provide the services that we give to the community, so that we'll have a baseline going forward. So the boards aren't always wrestling and struggling with those issues. We'll have you know, a survey, and we'll have professional kind of data to evaluate what we offer and what we have versus what other communities offer. So that's going to be part of kind of some of the work that the town is doing, and we're looking at bringing in some, you know, consultants possibly, and just trying to gather other information so we'll be better prepared for next year. So, I guess the key takeaway is, you know, we are recommending a budget of $87.5 million. We think this budget achieves the goals that we've laid out for this year. It supports community priorities, things like the library, youth and family services, and ambulance. We're saving for our future capital needs, and we're also minimizing the impact on the property taxes. I think we'd all love to see these numbers on the side at 0%. I think one thing that we need to do is look at structurally how we run our town government going forward. There's a lot of ways we need to think about, because like I said, 70% of this budget is just stuff rolling forward, that there's not a lot of ability to make significant changes to. So that's some of the things we'll be doing this year as well, is really looking at how we're structured and how we operate as a town government. But right now, I think this is a fair budget, and I look forward to getting community input from either tonight or going forward as this moves through the Board of Finance process, and I'm sure they're going to have lots of questions, and they're going to have the opportunity to also ask town staff about all the things in this budget. And so with that, I guess, I will, questions? Is that the next step? Okay, great. All right, questions. And Tom, I don't know, be available as well. Anybody have any questions? Yes, you want
Hi.
the,
I don't need that.
okay.
So that's a lot of money for the library. And my question is, when it went to referendum, was the public adequately informed of how much more this operational expense was going to be every year? And I would say no, because I don't remember seeing that in any of the referendum documents. So is there, with donations and all that, is there any way to push back on that? Because that's a lot of money for an increase. And I feel like there's rooms there that could perhaps be rented out, or is there revenue that we can expect them to kind of try to go for to help fund that?
Well, I think, first of all, keep in mind that 300 is coming up on a much lower base last year because it's a smaller library than it was a couple of years ago. Because 3 years ago, we had full hours, full staff, larger library. Now we're in temporary headquarters. The Board of Finance adjusted their budget 2 years ago to reflect the smaller footprint that they were going to be operating, knowing that this was going to happen, because that's the increase from a lower budget level. In terms of, I spent a lot of time with our library director to go through their budget, and I will say she is fantastic. She knows her business. Everything is data-driven. And really it comes down to two fundamental things. You have a certain amount of square footage that is much larger. It's double the square footage of our previous library. It's more efficient square footage, but the reality is it's double. So you're going to have a basic operating cost that's going to be higher for a building that's twice as big. And then secondly, if you have a bigger building, you're going to need more staff. There's a basic amount of staff that you have to have in a library for different circulation desks. And then the main driver is the hours. So the budget right now reflects the library staying open the same hours that it was open 3 years ago. That was what the community wanted, and I would think all of us want to be able to enjoy a library that's open, rather than trying to scale back the hours. Hours drive that budget a lot, and so I did spend a lot of time with her, though, pushing back. We actually saved them some money by the town providing services to the library, because I thought, how can we cost share in some way or help you out? So now we're actually doing the landscaping. They were going to contract out landscaping. For us, it's very minimal to add that to our services. And also for snow plowing. I'm amazed how expensive snow plowing can be, but that was another contracted service they were going out for, and our beach and rec teams who do town parking lots and service the senior center. We talked a bit about staffing. Was there a way to share custodial staff, and those are some ideas that we did talk a lot about. I think that the outcome of that was they felt that they needed specific needs in certain hours that the town couldn't provide, but we've talked about that. So there was a lot of discussion about how do we kind of partner with the town more to save the library money. And like I said, there's a lot of detail behind that number. They've been very forthcoming about how their budget is built up and what the drivers of their budget are. And I'm sure the Board of Finance will be able to ask a lot more questions about the library budget. So, any other questions? No? Okay. No.
Sorry. One quick question. In the capital funding budget, there's $1 million, last year it was capital non-recurring. What's in there? The $1,372,000?
CNRE, I know. I'm always forgetting about what CNRE is. That is basically more maintenance items that we know on a regular basis, like carpeting and those types of projects. Correct me, Stacy, if I'm wrong. Is that more than just CNRE?
Capital projects that do not have their own individual capital project funds. So we have individual ones.
Oh, that's right.
Excuse me, the fire department or the ambulance. This is a catch-all for everything else. Any big or large maintenance capital projects or new capital projects.
Like, for instance, what?
What's in there?
There's a whole detail.
Stuff at the surf club.
Exchange field, the surf club.
Yeah, I was thinking of the maintenance line in the actual budget.
So like repaving
For the
something at the
CIP
surf
fund,
club.
we're talking about CNRE.
lot of times it's not approved.
There's
Roads in a
a
separate category.
Okay,
A
so
lot-
something at the surface.
very long list, geothermal projects.
Yeah, like Scott, the Beach and Rec has a new facility going up for their trucks down at Surf Club. You'll see that in progress. That would go into that fund. There's a whole detailed list, and that's available on the website that builds up to that. I'm going blank. There's a lot of little projects. Scott, a lot of them either are Public Works or Beach and Rec,
Facilities,
and facilities. Yeah.
facilities,
Oh, Bill's here.
yep, Bill's here. Facilities and pretty much beach.
And the carpeting and stuff, that's the line.
That's
in
planned
there. That's in the
maintenance,
operating
that's
budget. I thought she was asking.
It is a
about that, so-
reserve fund, but
Yeah.
that's not what the CMRE
Okay. Can I ask one more? Sorry.
Yep.
It says the Madison hose and, oh, no, that's not that one. The Nomad apparatus truck, 130, and then next year 130. Is that you're saving for a truck?
Correct.
And so it takes, you save over a couple years? Okay, so you're not, okay.
Yeah, so this
Got
year
it.
we were able, because of that type of savings, we were able to purchase a $1.4 million fire truck for a downtown and a $600,000 fire truck for North.
By smoothing
Right,
it out
you're seeing the
and not doing
savings
it all in
here
one
versus
year.
the-
You
Correct.
smooth it out, okay.
You're seeing you're seeing what's put
Yeah,
in
and
the
then this
savings
year,
on there,
little
you're
by
not
little.
seeing the actual expenditure for the item.
We're planning for futures, right?
So this is kind of putting money away in those cases.
Correct.
So some we're actually spending, some we're putting it away. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. Ready to turn it over to you, Mark?
Nope, you can just end it.
Oh. Meeting adjourned. Hearing adjourned.
Good question.